windows my whole career, and everybody that we have in that locker room, all the coaches we have. Things are going to change year to year, but our window's always open.
You heard it from the franchise quarterback of the Bengals himself. Joe Burrow says that his championship window is always open. Do you believe that is the case? Is Joe Burrow's prime his entire championship window?
Yes. And also that doesn't mean that he's going to be competing for championships every year. That is my answer of kind of giving the nuanced answer of like Joe Burrow is correct. And also it's much more complicated than like you have Joe Burrow, therefore you are going to compete for championships every year. The Bengals still have to provide him with a stable organization and good players and maybe some good coaching. I mean, he's won already with shitty coaching, but at least to give him stable coaching and good players and a stable organization.
I'll say Zach Taylor's probably more middle tier coaching. I wouldn't say shitty coaching. He's had his moments.
I saw Zach Taylor try and call a timeout on the interception Logan Wilson made in the game against the Titans that ended up leading to them winning that divisional game last year. He tried to call timeout on the game-winning interception, but again,
Pete Carroll's also throws out his own kicker.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. But I am not a big Zach Taylor guy. But either way, that's besides the point. I just wanted to take a shot at Zach Taylor.
Well, you talk about stability. Don't you feel like Duke Tobin and the front office of the Bengals have created a stable environment? In fact, are the Bengals as bad as we once made them when everyone was having that debate? Should Joe Burrow say no to the Bengals? That was overblown to me. The Bengals, at least if you grew up in my generation, they're a team that was making it to the playoffs every year, pretty consistently. Even though Marvin Lewis never really could take that next step with this team, Andy Dalton could never take that next step with this team. Joe Burrow is better than Andy Dalton. I'll say that for sure. They went to a Super Bowl last year, so I saw the evidence that they can at least get to a Super Bowl. And they were within, 10 minutes of winning that Super Bowl? They had the lead. They had the lead in the fourth quarter. That's not something that shabby organizations tend to do. That's not something that's easily replicable. So I think that Joe Burrow is correct to say these comments. When I think about when he first came into the league, when he first started for the Bengals, the change was tangible. The change in the locker room, the change on the field was tangible for the Bengals. I think it was a Thursday night game against Cleveland where he put up like an insane stat line at something like 400 yards. This is even pre-Jamar Chase. This is before his knee injury, that you could tell that there was something to Joe Burrow. And there's like an aura that kind of surrounds him. Like going back to the LSU 2019 championship, just that level of confidence. Normally when someone's like overconfident, like Baker Mayfield, you kind of like tune them out, or Aaron Rodgers, you kind of start to get a little bit like, oh, okay, here we go. But like with Joe Burrow, I'm like, okay, you know what? I believe this guy. I feel this. Like his comment of the championship window is always open as long as I'm here. I'm okay. I believe this dude. There's something about me buying in that I feel like the players in his locker room also buy in. And I feel like that's why the Bengals have had such a quick turnaround.
I think the reason that's the case, and there are a handful of examples of this, so we can talk about like whether this is a psychology point, is like we have literally never seen Joe Burrow fail. Because remember, he didn't play at Ohio State. Our first introduction to Joe Burrow was with LSU in 2019, and they won the championship. And then in 2020, he tore his ACL.
Just quick counter. Didn't we see him in 2018 with LSU?
Well, we did. Okay, we did see him in 2018
Matt Canada was the one man that could make Joe Burrow fail.
But people didn't know Joe Burrow at that point. People were like, oh, it's LSU, but people didn't know who Joe Burrow was. I'm saying Joe Burrow went into that 2019 season as like the 12th biggest favorite for the Heisman Trophy, and then everything happened after that. So you have that championship season, 2020 tears his ACL, and then goes to the Super Bowl the next year. And then this year, the Bengals might have the best team in the AFC. And even if they are worse than Kansas City, they still won the AFC North. Like we got the Joe Burrow cigar photo again this week. So like our perceptions of Joe Burrow are such in that way. And yeah, I think that the aura that you talk about is there, only because Joe Burrow can back it up. Like he has an aura, and he's also one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And you kind of have to have both in order to necessarily succeed. So yeah, I think that there is something to what he's talking about. Where like as long as I'm here, the window is open, because they will at the very least be competitive. every single year that they have Joe Burrow.
So what would it take for you to move him a tier up? Because again, you consider Mahomes as tier one guy that his championship window is open. You've said that before. You believe that firmly. What's the difference between Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow when you look at their success in the league? Very comparable early career resumes.
I'm so glad that you asked that. The only difference is they've just done it for longer. I just need a larger sample size on Joe Burrow to put him in that group, which is not fair to Joe Burrow at all.
3 years, isn't that a long sample size?
Well,
some would say
2 years because he tore his ACL in 2020.
But he was damn good the year that he tore his ACL.
Yeah, the point being, like, Lamar Jackson won an MVP 4 seasons ago. So I look at that and I'm like, he has only put up, except for the year 2021. In 2020 and 2022, he has put up incredible numbers following those MVP seasons. And even the year that he didn't put up great numbers, the Ravens were still 2-2-point conversions away from being the number 1 seed in the AFC before he got hurt. So I give Lamar Jackson the bump there only because I've seen it for longer. Josh Allen's there because Josh Allen's been doing it for years. I'm on iffy ground with Josh Allen, but he's
like
right there.
Season longer.
Yeah, I know. And Joe Burrow's right there. I think Joe Burrow's going to be in tier 1 probably at the end of this year, I would assume. I mean, Joe Burrow is.
Well, what would be the difference between now and 3 weeks from now that would change that for you?
I'm not saying that there is anything. I think I have him at tier 2 right now, and maybe I go back.
But you are saying something because you have him tier 2.
Yeah, I have him in tier 2, and I think that's just because I think that Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes are better than him, and it's a kind of a semantics argument about Lamar Jackson versus Joe Burrow. I think Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow are 3 and 4, and the difference between 3 and 4 isn't that significant. So yeah, I think Joe Burrow might be tier 1. I'm not sure when or what that's going to change, but I think it's ultimately semantics because Joe Burrow is. I think Justin Herbert's in the same group. It's ultimately semantics because those quarterbacks with the teams that they have can win games against tier 1 quarterbacks any given week. 1 week they might look like Patrick Mahomes, and the next week they might look like Joe Burrow, or at least what we expect Joe Burrow to be. So I think it's ultimately semantics. I mean, the difference between 3 and 4 and 5
only
is
semantics
nothing.
until you have to put it in action in a game. And if I was to have you play GM here or play Dynasty or whatever it may be, and I was to tell you, you have Lamar Jackson, you have Joe Burrow, who do you want? You can sign anyone to a 1-day contract, put them in that game, biggest game in the world. Who do you trust to put in this moment? Then that's where the semantics kind of fades away, and you have to make the decision on who you think is just a better quarterback.
Well, in that very specific situation, then we can start to break down, like, what kind of roster do I have around me? What kind of playing style do I want? What does my offensive line look like? And if we want to go deep into like the Joe Burrow analysis part, I think the thing that's always been intriguing to me about Joe Burrow is that the things he does well don't pop off the screen. Like, he's really good at going through progressions. He's really good at hitting receivers on split out routes within small windows. Like, those things, it's the same thing that Justin Herbert does, except Justin Herbert every now and again does the like rolling to his left, throwing crazy plays. And I think that's something that like visually makes it difficult to process on Joe Burrow is like, what does Patrick Mahomes do well? Well, he buys time by doing these incredibly athletic things, and then he makes throws that nobody's ever seen, and also can complete 16 consecutive passes in a row like he did against the Houston Texans, and just checking down, beating you small ball. So like, I see that and I'm like, oh, he's, there's nothing I can pick apart there in terms of like what makes him lesser than insert quarterback here. With Joe Burrow, it's just
a turnover.
I mean, but would we argue Joe Burrow isn't also prone to a turnover the same way Patrick Mahomes is? Like, everyone's going to turn the ball over now and again. I mean, not as much as like Josh Allen. Like, he's got a turnover problem.
Josh Allen does have a turnover problem. So like, every quarterback has their certain faults. I mean, for at least this half a season with Patrick Mahomes, it was the too high safety. Now defensive coordinators have to adjust and find a new weakness that they can attack. Might not be easy because clearly you take away Tyreek Hill and he's still a dynamic quarterback, which I guess maybe that would be something to say. Like, if we were to take away Jamar Chase, right, would Joe Burrow be the same quarterback? We did have like a 3-week sample size where Jamar was healing up from the hip injury, and Joe Burrow still looked good in that time frame. And even before Jamar Chase, like I said, even pre-knee injury Joe Burrow, I knew that the Bengals hit on something. I knew that they landed something good. I'm confidently putting him in tier 1 now because just what I've seen, I've seen enough. Even if I want to include his last year in college where he was behind the greatest college football offense in history, that's all part of like Joe Burrow. That's all baked in for me. Like, I feel confident enough to say Joe Burrow is a tier 1 quarterback, as confident as Joe Burrow is in saying that his Super Bowl window is always open.
So I'm also realizing that the reason I have Lamar Jackson as a tier 1 quarterback is because he's been there for years for me and he hasn't done anything to really like knock him down. And so I feel like I've just kind of like placed him. I think it's the same thing with Josh Allen. Like Josh Allen hasn't had the greatest season in the world this year. Nick Wright brings up the stat that like since the Kansas City game, Josh Allen is like in the teens and 20s in a number of major statistical categories. But even that I don't think is enough to undo the things we know Josh Allen is awesome at. I think switching sporadically like that is something I try not to do.
I think why I would have Joe Burrow ahead of Lamar at this point is I just feel more confident in Joe's ability to win with his arm, especially when it comes to age progression. Is something that's going to be more valuable over time. And that's why so many of these arguments go back and forth on a guy like Lamar Jackson and potential for injuries. Not that pocket quarterbacks don't get hurt. It's just generally whenever you use your fastball, which for Lamar Jackson is his ability to run, use his athleticism. What's next? With Joe Burrow, he's got some athleticism, but ultimately he's a throw-first quarterback, and I feel like it can always work with that.
It's interesting because I think it's a semantics argument. I think the thing that Joe Burrow does super well is as valuable as what Lamar Jackson does super well. What Lamar Jackson does super well is what I saw in that playoff game against the Titans 2 years ago, which is slip through a half-inch window in the line and go 55 yards for a touchdown. What Joe Burrow does really well is go through progressions and put the ball into places that are incredibly accurate.
But maybe like when both guys are at their peak, Lamar's athleticism may give him a slight edge. But if we were just to go over consistency, peaks, valleys, I feel like Joe Burrow would be a little bit more stable. And that's why I think it's something I might value.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And the thing that's difficult is it's not anything Lamar Jackson has done. It's what Joe Burrow has done to succeed. It's not like it's Lamar Jackson isn't doing this thing. It's just what Joe Burrow does super well.
And
so
I think
that's
to
a really
compare those two because obviously they're going to be head to head for the foreseeable future. I'm going to run on the assumption that I think things get done in Baltimore with Lamar Jackson. I feel as though that's going to be our AFC North rivalry for the future. I feel as though maybe that tier 1 may be expanding.
Yeah. So one of the things I think is interesting about that is there is no cap on what could be tier 1. And like, we could always move tier 1 around to be like Mahomes is God tier. And then we get to tier 1. Like, there is no agreed upon metric for this thing. I like doing tiers because I don't like arguing who the 3rd and 4th best quarterback in the league is. Like, Lamar is 3, Joe Burrow is 4. Ultimately, like, what's the difference between the two? Like, it's basically nothing. And Justin Herbert wants a stake in this conversation as well, because Justin Herbert's knocking on the door right behind these guys. So ultimately, I think it's a semantics argument. And the point is true on both, which is as long as you have either quarterback, your championship window is open per se.
All right, guys. Well, let us know in the comment section down below. Do you believe that Joe Burrow keeps the Bengals championship window as long as he's upright? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias. From Juju and Kyle, stay safe, happy, and healthy. We will see you next time.